So everyone, we are on the Realty Plus Real Talk series, and here we talk to industry experts for their honest views and opinions and real facts and figures. And today we have with us architect Rahul Kadri, who's the director and principal architect, I Am Kadri Architects, which is based in Mumbai. In fact, the firm is known for its iconic projects across the country, from townships for Tata's, Jindal's, Reliance, hotels and resorts for Taj Group, college campuses for Symbiosis, and these are just to name a few. But more importantly, architect Rahul Kadri is known for his active involvement for effective development of open spaces in Mumbai. So architect Kadri, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Sapna.
And Mr. Kadri, as I said, that you are quite actively involved with the infrastructure and development. You have been providing thought leadership on that for the Mumbai city. So our conversation will be basically more about Mumbai. And recently there has been, the development that Metro Shed from RA was moved, and 800 acres has been reserved as forest land instead of the previous 600 acres. Many people are happy about it, but many others say for construction, for development of the city, and for the cost efficiencies, this was not a very prudent decision. What is your take on it?
Well, I feel development has to happen, and especially metros. Metros are the most efficient way for us to commute. So they're excellent. They're good in terms of how much space they use, how much power they use, how many people they're able to move, and the cost. But we cannot see these costs in isolation. You have to see how you can maximize everything, or optimize everything, and balance everything. You don't want to give up your biggest assets. Our biggest assets are forests. For Mumbai is our coast. These are all our assets. And if you can find a way to develop without giving up the assets, that's excellent. Because the cost of giving up a forest is so high and can lead to so many problems, especially, now we know the effect development is happening on the planet, and what is it's leading to in terms of all the kind of natural disasters, the storms, the floods, the um, droughts. Everything is becoming an extreme because of climate change. So I think we have to find a way to balance both these. And I think what the Chief Minister has done by taking a decision of moving it to Kanjurmarg is really a very balanced decision. And in fact, in 2016, this was suggested that this should be done. There was an expert panel of IIT professors, people from NERI, people from all backgrounds, the railways, and they're all said that this is the ideal thing. So it's a very good thing that it happened. It's great for development and for the city and for us as a people going in the right direction.
Because the cost that people, the authorities are projecting is about 4,000 crore, extra cost will be involved.
Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, they are saying 4,000 crore would be the extra cost, but I'm sure that extra cost is justifiable, if we are saving the nature, because we can't replace nature. We can probably get another.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's 4,000 crores. I think it'll be much less than that. Mm-hmm. The details are not fully known. It's definitely not 4,000 crores.
Okay.
But even if it is 4,000 crores, the benefits of joining Metro Line 3 and Metro Line 6, that's another benefit we're getting. So we need to see that there's an added benefit also, that commuters, from all the way up to Bhayandar now are connected all the way to Colaba. So there's an additional component, which is not just a cost, it is a value addition also. So that has to be taken into account. And you see, in the long run, this will not matter, this extra cost. If you lose our forests,
it's irreplaceable.
so these very short, narrow, 4,000 crores. Look at the utter waste that they are doing for that they were championing the Fadnavis government for the coastal road, right? The coastal road started as a 5,000 crore project to go from Nariman Point to Bhayandar. Today, only 10 kilometers, 9.8 kilometers from Nariman Point till Bandra is going to cost 12,500 crores. That means if you take it on the entire length, now this project from 5,000 crores is going to cost more than 30,000 crores.
Right.
Okay? And on a benefit, you have seats, 14 lakh more seats. It costs 50,000 people. And we're going to be spending up to 30,000 crores for 50,000 people who use the western side over here. At the most, it will be 1 lakh people. So the cost benefit, if you see,
Yeah.
yes, spend on metros, spend more on metros because that benefits the public. And don't spend on roads, which will, and the coastal road, the destruction it's doing to the entire coastline is unimaginable. I mean, we're losing those spawning sites for the fish, the wildlife, the coral, all of that is being lost forever. For really a benefit of a very small population of the city. 2% of the people who commute will use that. So, we need to see all the projects and then allocate our money accordingly to see where the cost benefit is the best. And the cost benefit in metros is the best. The other mistake we are making as a city is not having all metros underground. Again, they're saying the cost is too high to put it underground, but that's a very short-sighted view. Firstly, why the previous government had to do 15 lines? And if you don't have the money, don't do 15 lines. Nah. Do 2 lines, then wait 10 years, then do another 2 lines. Because once this is done, it's done for 100 years. You can't do these again and again. These are not something that, so saying you don't have money, therefore all these lines have to be overhead. Overhead just not only ruins the city, but you cannot create a network. And you have overhead, you have to put things only where the road is wide. So it cannot go to crowded area. Now see Delhi Metro, you can take the Delhi Metro underground and come up in Chandni Chowk, in the most crowded area. You can never imagine to have an overhead metro there. Not possible. If these things are possible, to reach the most congested areas only if you're underground. So those are again short-sighted mistakes. If the previous government, which this government now slowly, so I don't know, a very, very good one, a good beginning.
You spoke about floods and you spoke about short-sightedness. You also mentioned about the cost of nature. Now, flooding is an annual event which we see in the monsoons. Again, some people blame it on unprecedented rains happening year on year. Some blame it on BMC, the municipal corporation, not being efficient. But I'm sure the reason is somewhere deep down a different one. What is your opinion on that? What is the reason for that?
See, after the last major floods we had, there was a committee, a Chitle committee, who was appointed to look at all these issues in detail. And there were some very simple things like do a proper mapping of which are the low-lying areas, which are the areas likely to flood all the time, and don't allow major construction over there. Also allow more seepage of water into the ground. Don't concretize everything, because right now everything is becoming concrete, concrete, concrete. So the water can't even percolate inside, right? So it has to flow somewhere.
The marshlands, the mangroves, I think everything is getting destroyed.
Exactly, the salt pans, all the mangroves, etc., which act as a buffer, right? Um, so all these buffer zones, even normal land, if it's converted from farmland to forest land, if it's concreted, then the rain cannot go inside, right? So the more you convert from earth to concrete, the less the water can seep in. Now, the other thing is that the BMC says every year that our drains, which were designed at the British time, are designed for a particular capacity. And if the rains are going beyond that capacity, there will be flooding. So now we know with climate change that the intensity of rainfall at any given time is going to go up. I mean, that is a known phenomenon. The scientists have said this will happen more and more. So what the BMC needs to do is change its standards. Instead of taking whatever the 100-year intensity rate, need to take the last year's high intensity rate and plan for the future. The be to the standard change. If we're taking away all these buffer zones, shouldn't we look at bigger reservoirs underground where if this rain happens, we can store the water instead of it creating a flood? So, for example, Japan has millions and millions and millions of liters of underground tanks. So when there's high intensity rain, it's stored downstairs and then it can be reused again. So we need to look at all these methods. So, all this also stems from the Maharashtra Town Planning Act, where our Town Planning Act needs to be reformed, where these new issues need to come into the act and tell the government, you have to plan for this. We just released the development control rules. But in the development control rules, as per the Maharashtra Town Planning Act, there is no need for them to worry about the flooding and take into account flooding, etc. So there's nothing in the plan for that, right? But if it comes in the act that you have to consider it, you have to have a plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan for this, and it has to be considered, then it will happen. So those are also the reforms which need to happen in our acts.
It basically comes to, the planning, we need to plan in advance. The government agencies need to plan in advance.
And see, it's also the reforms which need to happen. See, government agencies will only do what is written in the rule books. Ye karna hai, aise karna hai, they will follow that. They have to execute. The policy is made by the politicians. The legislators who we elect, they have to work on reforming. They have to be better informed. So it's really the politicians who need to work on reforms. And ultimately, really, it's the people, right? If we don't tell the politicians, they won't do it. So it's the people who need to build up the pressure so that politicians say, ha, okay, karenge, and they take it up and they do it, and then they pass it on to the bureaucrats. So really, it starts from the people. We can't expect enlightened politicians to come from somewhere who will know everything. So really, the responsibility in a democracy is people have to make noise, right? And people have to agitate to some extent and tell the government. But the government has to be willing to listen. The previous government would not listen. Government at least listens a little bit. So we need to ensure, firstly, we elect governments who will listen to the people, and then they will act.
And I think we saw a good example in
RA here also.
We saw that good example in RA where people protested that they didn't want this construction happening, and finally we have a positive outcome on that. Another major problem for Mumbai is the housing. Because of the lack of decent, affordable housing, we see slums because the urban population in metro cities of India is, it keeps growing every year. We are not able to provide affordable housing. Government again has been doing a lot of things like housing for all, PMAY scheme, CLS subsidy that it is giving to uh, the low income group. But what are your views on the solution for housing in Mumbai? How can we slum redevelopment again they are doing with private developers, but what would be the, where are we going wrong?
We all had 50% of people in the city, right? So most 10 million people living in slums, 10 million people living in slums. This, I think, if you see, seems to be very few cities, less than 0.5% of the slums have been redeveloped using the SRA. So SRA is basically the a developer comes in, he signs an agreement with 70% of the people living in the slums, goes to the government, makes the application, then the land rights are given to the developer to develop, so that the slum dwellers get free 330 square feet homes, and the developer gets to sell a certain amount and makes a profit. This has been the only method to develop slums, and in the last 23 years, we have done only 0.5% of the number we were supposed to. We were supposed to do over 1 million. We've hardly done 45,000 houses in this method. So if we continue in this way, it is going to take us about 300 years to solve the problem, if at all the problem gets solved, right? So what is going to change? Is anything going to change in this method? I don't think so, because even if more slums are redeveloped in this method, developers will have to sell many more apartments. Now we know that the prices at which developers can sell these apartments have to be high, so they can give the free component to the slum dwellers. But at the prices they want to sell, the absorption rate of Mumbai is about 50,000 houses every month. Every year. So about 50,000, 50 to 60,000 apartments are sold in the city every year. So you cannot sell more than that, right? If you bring the price drastically down, then this equation will not work for giving it free. So this method mathematically cannot do more development. This method will only go at this pace because that is the absorption rate for the city.
Right.
The other problem with it is that because developers need to sell, they take land, and most and extremely dense. There are 2 lakh people living per square kilometer on that land. That density is extremely high. The average density of Mumbai is 20,000. So this is 2 lakh already. So it's already very high. Then the developer wants most of the land for sale. So all the slum people are now put on 25 to 30% of the land. So their density goes up to 6 lakh or 8 lakh square feet. So the density goes so high that there are tremendous health problems. There are health problems. There is no light and ventilation. There is garbage issue because the buildings are so close to each other and so tall. Safety women, because now the building twin story. There's a society that maintains the lift well, etc. The lift have to use the staircase. So crime is high. Infectious diseases are extremely high. So for the slum dweller, actually, this is not a solution. Even though we have said 45,000 slums have been redeveloped, they've been redeveloped in a very bad way. Because what is the main problem with a slum? The
That's
main
what
problem
experts
with
say.
a
It's
slum,
like vertical slums we are creating.
vertical slum, yeah. So the main problem in a slum is health, right? There's no light, ventilation, etc. So the same thing is repeated here. Okay, you get a pakka house, you get a toilet, you get water, that much is solved. But if your breathing is not there, if the quality of air is bad, is stale, if it is dark all the, can you imagine living in a house which is dark all the time? You know, we can't imagine it, that you can, that people live in houses like it, but that is what is happening. So what I say is that their health and their family's health forever in acceptance of this supposed free house. You know, so it's a deal with the, you know, it's a very bad deal, because you're giving away your entire health of your family and yours for life in exchange for this supposed free house. So it's of no use. So we've been thinking about this. What is the way? Um, is self-development the way? Should it be done without a developer? Should there be another other options where, say, NGOs come in? And this is happening in many parts of the country where NGOs are coming in, they're organizing people in the slums, so they're developing on their own. They put in some money of, because you know most people in slums can afford to take a loan of 5,000 or so. So there's a certain amount they can afford. So maybe 50-60% of the expenditure the slum dwellers can pay themselves. So you sell only a very small part. Um, Profit motive comes when NGOs comes up with a problem. You will sale possible. Solve, I feel, is not a workable thing at all. Instead, I feel a more workable thing is slum people redevelop themselves by taking a loan, and they redevelop only the size they can actually afford by taking a loan themselves. So they come down 100 square feet. So it'll be a room, kitchen. They get a toilet, they get one room. So 200 square feet, because 200 square feet cost about, and that is an affordable thing for them. So instead of free, it needs to become like this. Um, Otherwise, I don't think we can solve the problem any other way.
Self-development, and
Because
in fact, government,
self-development is the
yeah,
only way. This,
yeah,
yeah,
correct. And in fact, government
yeah,
is now providing CLS subsidy for developing your own house. So they give a subsidy on the loans for these projects. So that's a good thing. Again,
right.
housing is big problem. You spoke about health, and this current pandemic, we saw how the infectious disease spread across these pockets more. But we also see the example of Dharavi, where they were with such a good management, they were able to control the numbers. But the negative side that we came to see during this pandemic was the crumbling of our healthcare infrastructure across the cities of India. If we are talking about Mumbai, we will not even talk about the number of beds or the number of hospitals for the general public. That's a discussion, different discussion. But the quality of healthcare facilities. So, what are the lessons learned on that aspect?
Um, so before we come to quality, I think we need to talk about numbers and investment. Because the
Hmm.
government has been investing both in the center and state on healthcare last 30 years. So education and healthcare, they've been under uh, investing tremendously. Mumbai has a shortage of, not Mumbai, Maharashtra has a shortage of 35 lakh beds, 35 lakhs shortage as per WHO standards. If you take, we have a shortage of 35 lakh beds. We have a shortage of 2 lakh doctors and 20 lakh nurses, right? So if you have these shortages of such a high amount, how can you provide quality healthcare? You don't have enough beds, you don't have enough doctors, you don't have enough nurses. So our investment in this sector has been extremely poor last 30 years. So first is, yes, we need to invest. We need to get more doctors qualified, we need more nurses qualified, and we need hospitals. Without that, you can't provide anything. Uh, Also, what has happened in the architecture of hospitals in the last 20 years, they are building a very old style, which is they're depending tremendously on air conditioners. They have doubly loaded corridors. The corridors are dark. There is no natural ventilation, depending on the air conditioning system. And the air conditioning system, as we know, spreads the diseases. It's a very well-known fact. The sick building syndrome. Many people say you go to an ICU, you get infection of the person next to you, right? So you get more sick in an ICU than you get well. So depending so much on air conditioning, firstly, is wrong. We need to build our hospitals, to be more biophilic, to be more natural, have more fresh. Again, it comes down to breathing. What breathe? What is the quality of breathe? So making quality of oxygens, and generally, if that's fresh air, it is better rather than recycled air. Any air conditioning, only 5% is fresh air. So all these hospitals built in the last 20 years rely too much on air conditioning, which has to change. That is one basic thing which has to change. So you have to be biophilic, be more green. And as soon as you be more green, you take into these factors. So your building cannot be more than 50 meters wide. Right now, our hospitals are really deep, right? Because you've got departments on both sides and corridors, so that doesn't work. And this is still happening. The government hasn't learned that they need to mandate this and change this. I know hospitals which are being built today or which are being designed today by consultants, and they're still making the same mistakes. So we're not learning that you need to be more with nature and natural, rather than rely on older systems, or older ways of doing things. So that has to change in the design of hospitals.
Yeah, so I think the entire, what is coming out is that, the authorities, the planners, the designers, they are not in sync with the changing times, the changing needs and the changing requirements, whether it is our healthcare, whether it is our city planning, whether it is, keeping, the requirement of the ordinary citizen. That is what is coming out on this conversation. Another very interesting aspect is that, while in other segments we see a lot of professionals are working for the social projects. We have fintech companies working on micro loans for the bottom of the pyramid. We have IT professionals building very affordable gadgets and software for the masses. We have lawyers working for, again, for social projects. But in architecture, we are not seeing a lot of architects working on social projects, probably of housing for the low income or sanitation projects. Why is there this disconnect?
That's a very good question. I think it's changing. I think architects' mindsets have been more that you need a client, and what the client's vision is, you try to fulfill. And that has been the traditional mindset that architects Um, Even when we train school and college, we are not, taught to think that you can create the project, that you can be the creator in a sense that you can have a NGO, and if you feel a school needs to be built, that you can team up with others, raise the funds, and then build it. Um, that's not how our education system kind of talks to us or has us think. Um, I think that's the main thing. We don't have enough role models in India who are doing it. Um, the people we look to have done more traditional work. Maybe also all the magazines and books people read, it's only about commercial projects. So the exposure to these kind of work, you'll be surprised. There are many architects doing this kind. So when you start look slums in Thana, there are architects working. There's a group of architects working, helping people with housing. In Bombay, there are groups of people doing it. So there are not in the numbers we need, and these people don't get the exposure that they should because there's nobody benefiting from that, right? So it's changing. I think there are many architects looking at public spaces, designing public spaces, etc. What we've not worked out still is the funding model. How do we sustain ourselves whilst we do this work? Like how will, if we have a staff of 4 or 5 architects working in an office, how will we pay them? What will that method be? So that sustainable model has not come up, but it is beginning now. We'll see more of, but good.
I think it's also because of the fact that we are not giving due recognition to architects, for their work. We need to realize their importance in any of the projects, whether it is, as you mentioned, government projects or anywhere. We need to recognize their contribution and importance, that they are a very important part of it. And once we realize this, then obviously we'll start engaging more architects proactively. Maybe the government authorities will start engaging more proactively the designers with them. And for designers also, it is going to be like a challenge to their capabilities. I'm sure they will be interested to be part of such projects. But Mr. Kadri, coming to your this thing, you have been associated with a lot of community projects, and you have been, as you mentioned earlier, biophilic architecture is the design philosophy of your firm. So any projects that you would like to cite to give us an example of how to translate this philosophy in a real project?
Well, we really are very careful that it works very well on the site. We know that people thrive with nature. People want to be with nature. So I'll give you an example. In 2003, my first competition was for a resort in Kuru for Club Mahindra. We had gone to the site, and the person from the company who came, he showed us the site, and I walked around. It was a 23-acre site. I walked around everywhere, up and down, this, that, and the other. And he said, "Sir, phase 1 is supposed to be only over here, and the rest of the site we have to leave." So I said, "No, sir, phase 1 cannot be over there. Phase 1 has to be here, where I am." So, and the other thing he said is that, I have come with 6 architects on this site. Most of the architects have gotten out of the car, looked around, and said, very good, sat in the car and went back to the hotel. You are the only one who has made me walk for 3 hours up and down. And I even climbed some trees to see what is the view from up, etc. And he took a picture of me and he sent it to his bosses. He said, this architect is very good. He climbs trees also to really get an understanding of the site. So one is to get a deep understanding of the site. Then the other is, when you're walking around the site, etc., there's usually one place you come and stop. Right? Naturally, you come and stop in that place. That's a very important place. And that, for me, that's usually the starting point, that the project has to begin here. Because this is, when I walked around, I came and I stopped over here. There's some meaning in this place. Other places I didn't feel like stopping. I was walking, but I stopped here. So I told him it has to start here. When I came back to Bombay, I told the team, the site is beautiful, but behind every architect, a few months down the line, is a bulldozer, right? Because the bulldozer is going to come to make the buildings and to destroy everything. So I said, it's beautiful and it's sad that we have to build anything over there. So we'll have to be very careful of how we locate the buildings. I don't want a single tree cut. We have to mark each and every building tree. I don't want a single tree cut. And it should seem like we built within the trees, and people really get a flavor of this. See, it was a coffee plantation. Coffee plantations are like forests because the coffee grows below and they need shade. So I said this aspect of this nature we have to preserve, and we have to start the project over here. So the team said, sir, we are starting here, but the brief has told us we have to start there. We lose the project. I mean, the first competition which we are doing, we lose it. And I said, no, but my conscience says it has to be here. But they thought this fellow, he just does what he feels like. He doesn't listen to anybody. So we went and we told them why it has to be over here, why it cannot be over there, what our feeling was, how we need to build it, so that nobody should know that these buildings are built. I don't want to up the hill, halfway down the hill, so that from the road also you can't see any houses, you can't see anything. I said, see, views that people want to stand on top of the hill and they get in many projects. That you're right on top and you get a fantastic view. Here we have a chance for people to look into the forest. So if we build halfway in the hill, in the trees, then we'll be with the birds. Let us make a project with the birds and not on top. So it's all these ideas and thoughts of knowing people love to be with nature. That's how we designed it. We went to sit before it started, tested all buildings. A single tree would be cut. Spent 4 days on moving the building, redesigning the building. Isko udhar karo, and isko idhar karo. Normally, nice rectangular building, fatafat banao. But if you go and see Coorg, nothing is straight. Everything is little crooked here and there because the trees had to be. So, responding to the site and understanding the site is crucial in what we do. Even in this pandemic, we got a new project and the team was saying, no, sir, you can't go to site. I said, if I don't go to site, I can't start the project. I have to spend 1 day at the site. I have to see sunset, sunrise, and the middle of the day to see the movement of the sun on site. Till then, I'm able to design. So concern with nature is built into the DNA of the office, and this is there in all the projects we do. And this is really started from my father's time. But even his projects, a lot of these thoughts and respect for nature, etc., comes from him. And it also comes from the fact that I spent my formative years in a boarding school in Nainital. And I was not paying attention in the class, but my mind was more in the forest, and I was be walking in the forest most of the time. I just was concerned that pass ho jayenge to theek hai, otherwise just be with nature. So that in my formative years, that has had a very deep impact on that connection with nature. We try to take that in all the projects. answer to your question.
Right, and in fact, this is, that connection is very so visible in all the projects that we see from your, from your portfolio. But in fact, architects today are using Google Earth to visit the site. So, so that is a
उससे नहीं
new way
होता.
of doing things.
उससे नहीं होता.
Yeah, I've been told. So, but like you said, yes, unless you are there on the ground and you see things, that's a completely different, way of doing things. Uh, Again, anything for our young architects that you would like to give them an advice?
Yeah. Anything for a young architect? Yes. Think of the user. Talk to the user as much as you can. Find out their aspirations. What is their highest aspiration? What is going to make their life really, really better? Think about your client, but think about the users more. And your building will affect society. Whatever you do will affect society. So you need to think first of the user, then make sure it's economically viable for your client, and what impact it will have on society as a whole, and then design. So creating your strategic vision before the project, after really understanding how your project can transcend what in this particular thing, what it can do better than everybody else has done in enhancing the life of the user. So we don't look at shapes and forms independent of human values and what the human being are going to do over there. So it has to benefit the life of the users. That is important. And put things in order of priority, in order of importance. And these are the more important things and these are the less important things with your client. So I would say have a process of creating your strategic vision very carefully.
That's a very good advice. First the user and then the society at large. That should be the priorities for any designer. But thank you so much, Architect Kadri, for sharing your valuable views and thoughts and sharing your time with us. So it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your conversation and have a good day.
Thank you so much, Sapna. Thank you, Sapna. Thank you so much.